What's up, party people? It's Keys Dan with RadioWhat.com, DJLittleRock.com, coming to you live and in living color from the Radio What Studios. And this is my podcast, What Makes You Smarter. It's an extension of the RadioWhat.com internet radio station that I've been running for quite some time. And if you need DJ services, where do you go? DJLittleRock.com. DJLittleRock.com. Check availability and get a free price quote right there. And maybe you can have me entertaining you at your next event. Let me entertain you. And if you'd like to tell your story, I encourage you to check out my other podcast, What Makes You Famous. Find it everywhere using the hashtag What Makes You Famous. Let's learn some stuff right here on the program. Now, on with the show. Today on the program, 10 things you need to know today for Thursday, May 28th, 2020. 10 things you need to know today. Number 1, U.S. coronavirus death toll hits 100,000. The U.S. coronavirus death toll reached 100,000 on Wednesday, surpassing the grim milestone as state and local governments slowly allow businesses to reopen while continuing to push safety measures to slow the speed of the pandemic. The number of people killed in the United States in the 4 months since the first confirmed case in the country now equals that of the 1968 flu epidemic, according to the New York Times tally. This is expected to soon be the deadliest epidemic to hit the U.S. since the 1918 flu, which killed about 675,000 Americans. The number of new coronavirus infections and deaths has been trending lower, but public health experts warn of a possible second surge as states lift lockdowns. This is according to the New York Times. Number 2, Minneapolis protests continue over George Floyd's death. A protest outside a Minneapolis police station turned violent for a second straight night on Wednesday as crowds demanded justice for George Floyd, a black man who died after a white officer kneeled on his neck during an arrest. A protest in Los Angeles shut down a freeway. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey called for calm and backed demands for prosecutors to file charges against the officer. Quote, "Why is the man who killed George Floyd not in jail?" End quote. Frey said the officer and 3 others involved in Floyd's arrest on suspicion of forgery were fired on Tuesday after a video recorded by a bystander was posted online showing Floyd lying face down in the street as the officer kneels on his neck, even after Floyd gasped for air and says, quote, "I can't breathe," end quote. This is according to Reuters and the Associated Press. Number 3, Pompeo says Hong Kong no longer autonomous from China. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on Wednesday notified Congress that the Trump administration no longer considers Hong Kong to enjoy a meaningful degree of autonomy from China. Pompeo is required under a 2019 law to certify that Hong Kong maintains a meaningful degree of freedom to justify keeping the special trading status that has helped the former British colony remain a global financial hub since returning to Chinese rule in 1997. Pompeo's decision also raises the possibility of sanctions against Chinese officials. China's National People's Congress on Thursday approved a proposed security law that will let Beijing exert its power more overtly in Hong Kong. Thousands of people gathered outside Hong Kong's legislature on Wednesday to protest the security law and a proposal to criminalize disrespect for China's anthem. This is according to the Washington Post and the New York Times. Number 4, Trump to issue executive order on social media after Twitter clash. White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany said Wednesday that President Trump would likely sign an executive order on Thursday regarding social media, although she didn't provide any further details. Twitter on Tuesday, for the first time, labeled 2 of Trump's tweets as misleading. Trump suggested in the post, without evidence, the mail-in voting led to fraud. Twitter provided links to a fact-check page on the matter. Trump accused Twitter of, quote, interfering, end quote, in the 2020 presidential election. He also tweeted that Republicans, quote, feel social media platforms totally silence conservative voices. We will strongly regulate or close them down before we can ever allow this to happen, end quote. This is according to Politico. Number 5, Rosenstein to testify before Senate committee in review of Russia inquiry. Former Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, who appointed former Special Counsel Robert Mueller to investigate Russia's election meddling, will testify next week before the Senate Judiciary Committee, the panel said Wednesday. Committee Chair Lindsey Graham, Republican South Carolina, said Rosenstein would provide, quote, new revelations, end quote, about federal surveillance policies as the panel examines the origins of FBI's investigation of members of President Trump's 2016 campaign and their contacts with Russians. Trump and his allies say the Russia inquiry was designed to damage Trump's campaign and later his presidency. A Justice Department watchdog in December reported finding errors in the FBI investigation, but no political bias. This is according to Reuters. Number 6. House delays vote on extending surveillance laws after Trump veto threat. The House on Wednesday scrapped a vote on a bill seeking to extend surveillance options the FBI considers crucial in the fight against terrorism. House Democrats pulled the legislation after President Trump threatened to, quote, quickly veto, end quote, it. Trump said the, quote, massive abuse, end quote, of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court was a, quote, big part, end quote, of an attempted, quote, coup, end quote, against his administration in the early days of the Russia investigation. Trump's opposition prompted House Republicans to withdraw their support. Members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, which has about 70 Democratic House members, also came out against the legislation, saying it lacked reforms demanded by privacy advocates. The House reconvenes on Thursday and could try then to approve the spy program. This is according to USA Today and the Associated Press. Number 7. Playwright and AIDS activist Larry Kramer dies at 84. Playwright Larry Kramer, whose activism raised public consciousness about AIDS early in the epidemic, has died at the age of 84. His husband, David Webster, told the New York Times the cause of death was pneumonia. Quote, we have lost a giant of a man who stood up for gay rights like a warrior, end quote. Elton John said in a statement, quote, his anger was needed at a time when gay men's death to AIDS were being ignored by the American government, end quote. Kramer, who founded the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, or ACT UP, was widely known for his 1985 autobiographical play, The Normal Heart. Earlier in his career, he was nominated for an Oscar for his 1969 screenplay adaptation of D.H. Lawrence's novel, Women in Love. His play, The Destiny of Me, was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in 1993. This is according to the Associated Press and the New York Times. Number 8, Boeing trimming 10% of workforce. Boeing said Wednesday that it would lay off more than 6,000 employees this week to reduce cost as the coronavirus crisis hammers the air travel industry. The cuts are part of a push to trim 10% of the company's 160,000 plus workforce through voluntary departures and layoffs. CEO Dave Calhoun said in a note to employees that Boeing had finished the voluntary layoff phase, with 5,520 people choosing to go. Quote, and now we have to come to the unfortunate moment of having to start involuntary layoffs, end quote, he said. Quote, we're notifying the first 6,770 of our U.S. team members this week that they will be affected, end quote. Thousands more will be let go over the next several months. This is according to CNBC. Number 9, Tropical Storm Bertha drenches eastern Carolinas. Tropical Storm Bertha made landfall east of Charleston, South Carolina on Wednesday, hitting coastal areas in the Carolinas and southern Virginia with heavy rains and sustained winds of 50 miles per hour. The storm later weakened to a tropical depression, although it still threatened to cause, quote, life-threatening, end quote, flash floods as far inland as the southern Appalachians. The National Hurricane Center said the storm was expected to drop as much as 8 inches of rain in isolated coastal areas and up to 4 inches across the eastern and central South Carolina, southeastern North Carolina, and southwestern Virginia. The tropical moisture within Bertha caused record rainfall in the Miami, Florida area 3 days earlier. This is according to NBC News. Number 10, SpaceX delays first astronaut launch due to bad weather. SpaceX on Wednesday had to postpone its first launch of astronauts into orbit due to bad weather. The mission was rescheduled for Saturday, May 30th. President Trump and Vice President Mike Pence had arrived at Kennedy Space Center in Florida to watch SpaceX's Falcon 9 and Crew Dragon spacecraft take off before lightning and rains forced NASA and SpaceX to scrub the launch. The mission is to be the first to send humans into orbit from U.S. soil in nearly a decade, and the first time a private company has put astronauts into space. The astronauts, former military pilots Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley, both flew 2 missions on the space shuttle. They will travel to the International Space Station, which is orbiting 240 miles above the Earth at a speed of 17,000 miles per hour. This is according to the Washington Post. That's 10 things you need to know today for Thursday, May 28th, 2020. Thank you for listening. This has been What Makes You Smarter. If you'd like to tell your story or hear the stories of others, I encourage you to check out my other podcast, What Makes You Famous. Find it everywhere using the hashtag What Makes You Famous. That's it for me. I hope everybody out there is doing reasonably well. Drop me some comments. Let me know what's going on in your neck of the woods. It's Keys Dan with RadioWhat.com, DJLittleRock.com. Peace. I'm out of here. Peace. If you like what you hear, I encourage you to follow What Makes You Smarter on social media. Find it on Facebook at What Makes You Smarter, Instagram at What Makes You Smarter, Twitter at SmarterWhat, and YouTube, username Keys Dan. Leave What Makes You Smarter podcast a review and subscribe. Listen to What Makes You Smarter podcast on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, and Podcast Addict. My personal favorite, learn with me on my podcast, What Makes You Smarter. And if you'd like to tell your story, I encourage you to check out my other podcast, What Makes You Famous. Find it everywhere using the hashtag What Makes You Famous. Call 501-470-6386 and leave a message to set up a time for What Makes You Famous. Support What Makes You Smarter podcast using the PayPal, paypal.me/Keys Dan. Email info@radiowhat.com. What Makes You Smarter is a production of Keys Dan Enterprises Incorporated at keysdan.com. Thank you for listening.